Hi, Adam.
Hi. So nice to see you today.
No, wait, I gotta have some. I'm gonna pour my tea.
Oh, again, we're going to call it tea. Okay, I'll go through this charade with you.
Yeah, tea.
We should stop joking about that sooner or later.
My. Do you
Which
like
mug
my?
is that? Who's on
This
there?
is the McRae Ranch Foundation
The
for
McRae?
Joel
Joel
McRae.
McRae. I was going to ask you if that's. Um,
Um,
well,
hey, let's talk about Midnight Cowboy. Hold on, I'm
it's
gonna
a
do.
great thing that these books have been coming out. Like we've been gotten so lucky.
I know.
Um,
I
and this
love
is
it. What are
three
we
in a
gonna do
row.
next?
We've like hit three in a row that are one better than the next or as good as the next.
And what's been so much fun is that it's like our own little private book club, right?
Right, exactly. I hadn't thought
Where
about
we
that. Yeah.
can, which I prefer. I don't want group opinions. I only want you and me, and maybe the author.
No, I'm looking forward to talking to Glenn.
Yes,
because he did the show a few years ago with the last book, the High Noon book, and
yes.
This just I was so happy to see this pop up in my email.
Well, one of the things that I loved about the book, I mean, it says it in the title: art, sex, loneliness, liberation, and the making of the dark classic. And so what you get in the book is not only the era, of independent filmmakers and John Schlesinger, British director, kitchen sink reality, coming here, making an American movie, the discovery of John Voight and Dustin Hoffman. So there's so many of those pieces, but then there is the author, James Leo Herlihy, his backstory. I love the way Frankel weaves together James Leo Herlihy's trajectory and Schlesinger's trajectory, and then brings them all together for the making of the movie, and then introduces discussing Voight. It's almost like he sets us up so that by the time we get the interviews with John Voight and interviews with Dustin Hoffman, you're really hooked. Did you have that feeling?
Yes, and I really appreciate it. I'm like, why is he spending so much time on the author of the novel? Because this is about the making of the movie, but it starts to make a lot of sense. And I like all the central characters. Like I've read books that have done this, and where they really emphasize how much of two things. One is how much of a collaborative effort it is by many more people than than you might think, and then also the right moment at the right time. How just this congruence of incredible talent at the right moment, and also just how much on the cusp of so much the country was at that particular moment in time, like the gay subject, and New York City, and the country where that movie making, for that matter, we're just on this cusp of this whole new time in 1967, 66, 67, when they were shooting it, and pre-production, into production. Like it's just, so the book is really a great way into that whole thing.
Yes, all the little all the contributions, from the song to costume designer, the great Ann Roth, who I was privileged enough to work with Ann Roth. Wow. And the DP Adam Hollander of Midnight Cowboy, and John Schlesinger.
Unbelievable.
And I've seen Dustin Hoffman and John Voight on stage. That's my only.
Me too. Not John Voight though.
I saw John Voight in The Seagull.
Oh, okay.
On stage. It was excellent.
Was that Mike Nichols?
I'm not sure.
Did a different version, right? Because remember, that was the thing when we were doing the Mike Nichols book, that he.
No, this must have been a later version.
Okay. Yeah.
Later version. Mm-hmm. this man, was this the play? Maybe Ethan Hawke was in the play with Jon Voight? I don't know. We need to go to the internet for that.
We'll do that.
I know for sure it was Jon Voight, but it may have been Ethan Hawke, an Ethan Hawke play.
Did you see Hoffman in Death of a Salesman?
And yes, of course.
Yeah, that's what I saw.
You weren't anybody unless you saw Dustin Hoffman on stage in Death of a Salesman. If you were living in New York at that time, kind of a must-see ticket, you know.
Absolute great production.
When I was a kid, I was trying to remember the first time I saw Midnight Cowboy, but if it was on television, and then
how would that? Yeah,
I don't, you know, I don't quite remember, but I saw it, and you know, for some reason I had the paperback, or bought the paperback, and I had the album, so I must have had a lot of an attachment to it. I think mainly because of the two, you know, actors in it.
Yeah, well, you were still too young, of course, but I mean, it probably just rippled. I mean, it was such a New York movie, and it was such a part of the culture when it came out, and the success of it, that it had to leak into growing up in Connecticut. I mean, you weren't that far from that whole world.
Well, I probably would have seen it again in my trajectory of watching The Graduate, you know, and then, you know, discovering this. And then I think from this, I saw Catch-22, which also had Jon Voight in it. So, I saw on television.
I'm certain I saw Midnight Cowboy on VHS, like sometime probably in the 80s.
I think it would have had to have been to see it a cut. I'm going to be 99% sure that I would have seen a very cut version on television. Maybe that's why, you know, when I saw finally in a movie theater, you know, many years later, the X-rated, you know, when the X comes on screen, I don't even think I was aware that it was an X-rated film until many, many years later.
It's just your run-of-the-mill depressing story of the underbelly of New York City.
Well, yes.
Should we bring Glenn on, or?
Yes, let's bring Glenn on after one more showing of my book.
Right.
Here.
For sure. Here we go.
Nice. Okay.
Where's that Joe Buck?
Where's that Joe Buck?
Where's that Joe Buck?
Yeah, where's that Joe Buck?
I'm Joe Buck from Texas.
Enrico Rizzo from the Bronx.
His name is Joe Buck. He's a cowboy. He just came in from Texas.
Cowboy, huh? I ain't a for real cowboy, but I am one hell of a stud.
Then how come you ain't scored once the whole time you've been in New York?
'Cause I need management, goddammit!
Let's go.
Hey! I'm walking here! I'm walking here!
You were gonna ask me for money? How much is this gonna cost me?
$20.
You big Texas longhorn bull!
No rich lady with any class at all buys that cowboy crap anymore. Frankly, you're beginning to smell. And for a stud in New York, that's a handicap.
I should never have asked you up here.
More goddamn faggots in this town.
I'm gonna use you. I'm gonna run you ragged!
Hey, listen, don't get sore or anything, okay? I don't think I can walk anymore. I'm scared. You know what they do to you when they find out that you can't walk. Oh, Christ.
Everybody's talking at home. I don't hear a word they're saying, only the echoes of my mind. People stopping, staring. I can't see their faces, only the shadows of their eyes.
Not bad for a cowboy.
I'm going where the sun keeps shining through the pouring rain. Going well.
Just tell you your face. I love the book. Couldn't put it down.
Oh, thanks.
So much fun.
Totally.
I don't think I could, it's so funny because when I was a kid, I was such a movie buff, and I was one of those people who had got the little paperback.
Right. Yeah, me too.
Wait, what? You got the paperback of what though? Of Midnight Cowboy?
The novel.
You did not, Illeana.
Yes, because
why were you reading that as a young woman?
Because we didn't know any better. Was like the 70s. You just read. It was like that's what I was thinking as I read the book. I was like, I remember reading this. Like, I must have been like gone over completely. Like, okay, so he's a male prostitute. It just was like paperbacks came out with a movie, and you often read the it was an incentive to read the paperback, I guess.
Yeah, no,
that book did incredibly well after the movie came out. It sold like almost 1 million copies or something. So it wasn't just Illeana and me.
There was no novelization of it. Remember those?
Yeah, well, the novel came first in this case. The novel was from 1965, so they couldn't novelize the novel.
Right. Well, I had to give my dad, who passed away not long ago. Sorry, but I only mentioned because he would take me to my parents, both of them. In fact, they would take me to, but my dad was worse. He would take me to I was Chinatown. I'm
yeah.
I'm like, and then he would. But he would cover my eyes when, the nose slit would happen because he was a good parent. He was a responsible parent. So
right.
Why should he didn't want to expose me to that? But I will give them credit for not taking me to Midnight Cowboy. But although I did, my cousin, I grew up in my big cousin, older cousin, she had in her East Village apartment the poster, big. In her, and I was always fascinated by it. I was always wondering, what is that movie? What is that? It just stuck in my head.
Incredible poster.
Yeah, it was beautifully done. And my parents wouldn't even let me go see Tom Jones when I was a kid. So, I had to wait to run off to college to see all these things. But
I saw everything. I've told the story many times of how I suffered through The Servant, the double feature of The Servant and Death in Venice.
Wow.
I rewatched The Servant recently on Criterion, as well as Far from the Madding Crowd.
Mm-hmm.
And just loved it. Just loved that whole series.
Yeah. Well, your folks were still under the influence, right, of the 60s, as I...
Obviously, it was.
My folks were not.
It was happening in our backyard. They were hippies, so right. There's no real difference between the movies in our backyard. I wanted to ask you before I want to ask my favorite thing, which is in reading the book. One of the great things you get out of it is it's one of the most collaborative films. And you wonderfully piece that together like a quilt. The costumes by Anne Roth, the addition of the music and the soundtrack, and the casting, of course, by Marion Doherty. And so, was that something you thought about going into the book, or something you pieced together as you were writing it and interviewing everyone?
I just stumbled into it, like so many of the things I end up doing. I mean, I knew it was going to be a rich subject, but I had no idea either in terms of the gay context, what I was getting into, and that was great. And then these incredible people who make the movie, and John Schlesinger, for all his anxieties and his up and down, worries, he was a great sort of band leader, and these folks, the ones who are still around who I could talk to, they loved working with him. And so I was just fortunate because that, you're a writer, that really helps power the narrative when you have so many interesting people who just kind of show up in the course of the book. No, I had no idea. I'd only barely heard of Marion Doherty. Mm-hmm. I didn't know anything about her. And that's the beauty of what I do, because unlike you, I have no experience at all in motion pictures in the industry. I got a few friends here and there, but nothing. And it's not even like good old Mark Harris, who who's my idol, you know, who has so many connections and through Tony and everything. I don't have any of that. I just kind of get started. And so I just stumbled into this wonderful crew of people at the height of their powers,
Right.
all brought together by Jerry Hellman and John Schlesinger.
Well, now that you mentioned stumbling into it, but it seems like as you do delve into your subject, that you are eventually discovering that it feels less and less arbitrary in the context of your body of work.
Yeah,
like
no,
there's
absolutely.
something going on there with those books that you're writing.
Well, again, stumbling is the right term. I found this little subgenre of books that are about the movie, but also about the historical era that the movie reflects. And I mean, you've said this too, Illeana. I've been, you know, movies are a great vehicle for looking at the past, for looking at the era they were made in. They reflect the culture of the era, whether they mean to or not. So Molly Haskell says they're a looking glass.
Mhm.
You know, so that's what my books, that's my little subgenre. I'm just an old Washington Post reporter. I mean, I know about history a bit and I can, you know, and I'm excited by that, but latching onto this thing where I've got a great movie to serve as my vehicle and to get you under the skin of the era, really, in a way, I'm a lucky guy.
You are. Well, in era, not only the era, but the locations. This is could work as a New York City travelogue or New York City book on a certain level. You spent a lot of time painting a picture here about New York City at that time too.
And I was really lucky because I went to Columbia between 1967 and 71.
Oh, wow.
And I had no money in my pocket. And of course, I walked the streets a lot because it was so interesting. And I went to movies on 42nd Street, never even to a porn movie. I just double features, or I think I saw The Wild Bunch on 42nd Street for the first time. I loved movies. So this gave me some sort of anchor in how I felt about New York and what struck me as to what a lonely, difficult place it could be. I had nothing like Joe Buck, but some personal experiences as an 18-year-old walking around town. And so that helped me, but it was very daunting to think about writing about New York in the 60s. Fortunately, you latch onto some characters and you hope they're going to take you through it. And more or less, that's what happened.
I wanted to go back and ask about the author, James Leo Herlihy, because again, as I was reading the book, I said, oh my God, I didn't know he wrote Blue Denim. You know, like Blue Denim was a movie and a play that I was very well aware of. We used to do it in acting school, scenes for Denim. I never in a million years would have associated James Leo Herlihy and didn't know he was an actor.
Right.
So didn't know he was friends with Aeneas Nin. So that's a wonderful section too of the book, is explain who he is, learning about him.
Well, that's how I felt going into it. I knew nothing about him at all. I mean, and the fact that he was so obscure, you know, was a great opportunity. On the other hand, I was thinking Jim's going to take me through Times Square in the 60s. The handsome man, you know, out there scoring and obviously knows so much about male hustling, as you can see in the novel.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a naive thought on my part, because Jim is a very discreet man and he doesn't tell me anything except what you can intuit from the novel. Nonetheless, he was great, a great character. And I really feel it's important. I mean, in the Searchers book, I kind of excavated Alan LeMay, the writer of the novel, The Searchers, who is a very interesting figure and head of the Screen Writers Guild at one point. These guys, and Waldo Salt for that matter, these are great writers who have been obscure, who are obscure names now. And I love being able to write about writers. And Herlihy he's a pretty interesting guy. He gets interviewed endlessly after this movie comes out about his new book, this book and the book he does after this, but he only writes 3 books in the end. And they ask him all kinds of questions, but they only ask him one question about the damn movie, which is, how'd you like the movie? They never ask him about Joe Buck, say. I never could find out where Joe Buck really comes from. You know, did he meet Joe Buck on the street? Was he Joe Buck on the street? There are a couple of holes in this book that, you know, I felt I really wanted to fill and couldn't, but nonetheless, yeah, he's a fascinating guy. I got to meet his partner from that era, Dick Duane, who died recently.
Mhm.
Dick was very generous with his time. He loved Jim, still, you know.
I
just did the best I could with what I had.
Is it your sense from your conversations with Dick? Is that his name?
Yeah.
Duane? That Jim had undiagnosed depression?
Yeah, self-diagnosed anyway. Yeah, Jim was up and down a lot, and their relationship could be very tempestuous at times.
Well, this is true with anybody living with somebody with depression.
Yeah, it was, and Dick wanted a quieter life. Jim was just a complex guy, up one day, down the next. He would grow tired of places and just leave, you know, that sort of thing. He hid behind his persona. He's a great actor and a very handsome man. People really liked hanging around with him, and he could be very kind and gentle, especially to younger people, like Jeffrey Bailey, who is another person who was very helpful to me and who's kind of the guardian of Jim's legacy now. But yeah, he was a hard man to deal with, and hard on himself too, but you know, I'm just glad I could write about him. I now have written more about Jim Hurley than anybody in the history of the world. There's a guy out there in Oklahoma who says he's doing a biography, but you know, let him come and do it, you know. But in the meantime, I'm so glad I was able to capture as much as I could about him.
I love the other little in 60s insight of the term that where did the title, I mean, I know, but the title Midnight Cowboy, where does that come from?
Yeah, well, you know, tracing that back, it supposedly is Tennessee Williams describing Marlon Brando during the rehearsals for, you know, Streetcar. That, you know, and he says that to a couple of friends down in Key West at one point, and Jim either hears it direct, is listening in on that conversation because he was hanging out at the outer side of Williams's circle, or he hears it in turn from somebody who was there. Apparently, though, the term Midnight Cowboy is thrown around Times Square. I mean, and you know, occasionally, I don't know, not today, of course, but back in the day, you see a few cowboys, people dressed as cowboys wandering around, because that's a good hustle, you know, for some people. So I don't think Williams invented it, but Williams used it, and Jim picked it up, and you know, and off we went. And it's a perfect title. I mean, it's just wonderful.
This really captures the film, perfectly. The other thing the book does is it really does service to, you know, the films of John Schlesinger, who again did not live quite long enough. And I think I was in one of his last films, The Next Best Thing.
Oh gosh. I didn't know you were in that.
Yes, I was, because I was neighbors. As I was saying at the very beginning, I was neighbors with John and his partner Michael, who appears again in the book quite extensively. And Michael Childers, great photographer. And you know, when John Schlesinger asks you to be in a movie, you know, what are you going to say? No, you know, so it was, for me, it was a fun experience, and I did make him laugh because he asked me what I thought of Rupert, and I said, "You mean Madonna and prima donna?"
Yeah, that's the kind of humor he would have loved. Absolutely.
And I had a blast, you know, so because I'm the observer, even when things go wrong, it's perfect for me. So but anyway, the point is that although Cold Comfort Farm, one of his later films, did get some play, I just wanted you to talk a little bit about his trajectory of becoming involved in the film, and then obviously starting with Darling and and then his great success with Sunday Bloody Sunday, but just he's been sort of overlooked as a filmmaker.
Yeah, he's not on, you know, when you run down the pantheon of New Hollywood, John doesn't make the cut. And well, you know, I think that's unfair, but that's the way life goes. I mean, those movies, you know, stand up. The movies that he made in that era stand up to anything. I see a direct tie, incidentally, between Midnight Cowboy and Taxi Driver. I mean,
absolutely.
You know, and Taxi Driver sort of Midnight Cowboy's evil twin in a way.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I love both movies. I'm just knocked out. I saw it, you know, I'd seen Taxi Driver when it came out, of course, and then I watched it again for this book, and I was just blown away by Taxi Driver, and could see the direct connections between those two. So John, you know, he wanted to be a great entertainer, and he wanted to have great success, as well as make movies that were meaningful to him, and that was a hard, you know, circle to close. Mm-hmm. And it got harder and harder as Hollywood went through all those changes, and you know, and you know, just making the next best thing, you know, was an effort of his to still stay fresh and new and be a Hollywood director, but it wasn't his movie. I mean, he didn't, you know, he didn't initiate the project. They had stopped, you know, they weren't making his projects anymore. Yes, Cold Comfort Farm, which I think is a lovely movie, was you know, an exception to that, but by and large, he's in the service of Hollywood, and at that point, and it's not going well, and he's not feeling well either. So
yeah, he was like in the period that I knew him, he was like the great elder statesman.
Yeah.
Period of, you know, which is unfortunate, you know.
Yeah. I get the impression Hollywood doesn't treat its elder statesmen with all that much respect.
Code for irrelevant. It's code for irrelevant. I mean,
yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
But so he comes off of Far From the Maddening Crowd, which Darling, which was a success, right? He was part of the John Schlesinger was part of a wave of the angry young men, sort of kitchen sink films that were blowing up in the UK across the pond. And then gave him the opportunity to work in Hollywood. This film. Right? Yeah,
exactly. They want him in Hollywood. Now, Far From the Madding Crowd is not a successful movie at the box office. It's a flop, and so suddenly it's kind of a mixed message. On the one hand, they've invited him and they've offered him things. On the other hand, after Far From the Madding Crowd bombs, they don't want to. You know, they don't return his phone calls and they don't call him. So it's an interesting moment where he can still, you know, go, you know, he can go to MGM and all that, and he goes with them with this bleak novel that they've already rejected a couple of years earlier, you know, and so he has trouble, you know, finding some place to latch on, which is where United Artists comes in, of course. So it wasn't an easy road to get even to make Midnight Cowboy, but it brings out the side of him that is determined to do what he thinks is important to do meaningful work that he wants to do. And that's always in conflict with him in some ways, with, you know, doing something that Hollywood wants him to do. Mm-hmm. Not the last person, I think, to have undergone that kind of, you know, conflict. Yeah. He wanted both. He wanted to be successful and loved and entertaining, and he is, you know, but at the same time, he knew what he wanted to do. That's what made him so interesting to me.
Yeah, I mean, his later on career movies like Marathon Man and The Falcon and the Snowman, they're still very good films, you know. Yeah. Probably the best of his later work, as I said, except for I happen to love Cold Comfort Farm. I think it's a very sweet little film, British film.
And Madame Suzaka, I'm pronouncing it, but that's a really good film.
That's the one I always forget that he made.
Is that with Shirley MacLaine?
It's a beautiful little film. Shirley MacLaine. Yeah, she's terrific.
I forgot about that film.
Yeah,
this little film. It's nice because it's a discovery. You know, like it's sort of under the radar for most people, but it's definitely worth seeing.
Absolutely.
I wanted to ask now, of course, these wonderful cards that you found from the casting director, Marion Doherty, about the casting of Dustin Hoffman, hot off of The Graduate, taking this smaller supporting role, and the discovery of John Voight, and he almost didn't get the part.
Right. Well, first of all, talk about the fact what Illeana just said, that Hoffman coming off of The Graduate is now like the fifth Beatle, as you put it, right? He's a superstar, a sex symbol. He's the Jewish, what are they calling him? The Jewish Cary Grant?
Cary Grant, yes.
Which is hysterical. But did he know going into the project that he was more of a supporting? I mean, is it there on the page, or did he? Because it seemed like he was disappointed afterwards, after the film is locked and he sees it. He's like, wait a minute, I'm pretty sure I was in more of the movie than that.
The script was more or less locked, though. You know, they spent a couple of weeks in rehearsals, and he and Voight were doing improv, and you know, some of that was then written into the script. Intimate things about their characters. They were building their characters right in front of John Schlesinger's eyes at these auditions, at these rehearsals. And it was a fabulous experience. You know, it's possible for Dustin Hoffman to have two contradictory thoughts in his head at the same time. And the most, you know, he was a driven, I mean, you know, Illeana, having, you know, he was a trained New York actor like Voight. I mean, gone through hell to get parts. Short little guy with a big nose, and you know, and it took him, you know, nearly a decade to begin to establish himself off Broadway as a formidable performer. He was getting really good reviews. He had no idea he was going to get The Graduate to begin with, and no idea that he could ever become a movie star. And he doesn't only become a movie star, he becomes a kind of counterculture icon, because The Graduate is a generation gap movie. It's the movie of my childhood, you know. It was, and so Dustin Hoffman suddenly is a big star, but having made fun of Hollywood all those years with his pals Gene Hackman and Robert Duvall, he's very conflicted about being a big movie star. Very conflicted because everybody's saying, well, Mike Nichols created him and, you know, directed this kid through this thing. This kid is 29, 30 years old and has been around a long time already. He wanted to show them he could be an actor with a capital A. And so he really wanted this part because he saw what a great part it was. I don't know if he counted the pages exactly on the screenplay, but he, you know, manages. Then Schlesinger doesn't want him. He doesn't want some big time new movie star to mess around with his little low budget movie. He likes to create movie stars. He doesn't want to use one.
Right.
So anyway, Hoffman meets him, famous at the Automat at, you know, midnight, and does his thing, and by 5 a.m. he's worn Schlesinger to a frazzle, but Schlesinger admits, you fit in here, you're fine, and he hires him to do it. Wow. So Hoffman loved working on it. I mean, it was a complicated time in his life because everybody wants a piece of him, and they, you know, Time magazine does call him the fifth Beatle. I always thought that was Brian Epstein, but never mind. You know, he was so big. He was so big. He was so, you know, so symbolic, you know, somebody we all admired so much. And he does get cold feet at the end, partly because he's a little angry that some of his stuff has ended up on the cutting room floor. There were a sort of Chaplin-esque physical comedy scene at the psychedelic Andy Warhol style party. All that gets left behind. Every scene has John Voight, and they don't have him. And he understands it on one level, of course, but on another level, he is a big movie star, and he's got a big ego, and he, you know, wants in.
Well, I think clearly that if John Wayne had not been up for True Grit, it is, as you watch it today, it is an Academy Award performance from top to bottom. I mean, that final scene of them, it's unbelievable. So when I see the movie, and when I first saw the movie, you know, probably in high school, I was like, how could John Wayne win over? Now that I'm in the Academy, I understand why John Wayne would win. But, you know, when you the comparison is like, this was an actor at the top of his game. So to me, it makes sense that this is the movie he would want to do after The Graduate, just something completely opposite, shows his range, his versatility, his fearlessness.
Yeah.
Both of the actors, that to me is what you get from the book, is the fearlessness of playing these hustlers, and their relationship. At one point, Hoffman comes to Schlesinger and says, I think there should be a scene where we should be sleeping together. We should be in the same bed. So, I mean, he's just like, well, these are actors that were willing to go there.
They were committing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the other thing that worried him, though, at the end was the fact that the movie was rated X. He's gone to a preview, to one of the first previews, and he's watched as some members of the audience have walked out, essentially at the Bob Balaban movie house, grindhouse balcony scene, where Balaban is performing on Joe Voight, on John Voight. And people were discussed, some people walked out on that. And then he finds out the movie's being rated X. He doesn't know the real story behind that. And he's afraid suddenly that he's in a porn movie of some kind, or that it's going to be treated that way. He thought it was a very important movie, but at the same time, he's building a career too. So he rushes out and makes John and Mary, another movie I saw when it first came out with Mia Farrow. Just this harmless little romantic thing.
Yeah.
And only later, when the movie not only does well financially, but also is a critical success, and then it gets all these nominations, he starts to come back to it. And he's pretty, when I interviewed him, he was pretty frank about all this. I'm not a perfect person, as he put it, which was a surprise to me, but I could accept it. He had his concerns. So on the one hand, he's incredibly brave, and you're absolutely on target. These two guys it's a joint performance. It's a collaborative thing. And I love talking to each of them about the other. And they know what they did. They know, I don't know, Illeana, I can't think of a better pair of male actors in a mainstream American movie who are better than these guys. They're just so, and that joint performance still, resonates all these years later as the very, very best. So they're very proud of it. Voight is too, but it wasn't easy. And Voight had no doubts. He didn't, he was coming off of nothing. They were paying him $70,000.
Nothing to lose.
He had nothing to lose, and he loved it. It was hard, but he loved every minute of it. Hoffman was a more complicated person.
Yeah. I want to mention one thing, since you brought up the X-rated subject, is that back then, in that time leading up to the film, X was not what it became a short time later. It didn't necessarily apply to pornography, which wasn't really a commercial thing like it became in the early 70s. It was not long after where those became blockbuster, pornography became hip. There were movies that were assigned X because there was just a mature factor to the film that they wanted to protect from the kids, from young people. And that was all it meant. Even though it could obviously still have an impact on the box office, but it wasn't suggesting it was pornography, because that wasn't a thing yet.
Well, that's true, though Hoffman said he was worried about that. I mean, the rating system had actually gotten put into reform the way movies were treated. Like, they got rid of the old production code, that system of self-censorship that was, very creaky and had been destroyed basically by a number of adult movies in the 60s, including Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. So they put in the rating system, to try to give more flexibility and to allow for more adult themes. For one thing, they needed, they knew there was a younger audience out there that was beginning to dominate the box office, and they wanted to reach that audience, and the audience wasn't really that interested in the kind of old genres that Hollywood was so comfortable with. So the rating system was designed to give people like Schlesinger more room. There's no way they could have done this movie 5 years earlier, but the rating system did give them some breathing space to do what they wanted to do. But you're right, it was in the process of formulating what was what and what you could do. And of course, the thing that I learned that surprised me was that it wasn't rated X originally by the ratings board, it was rated R. because they understood what a serious, important movie it was. But Arthur Krim, the head of United Artists, who also loved the movie, but it made him uncomfortable, especially the gay sex scenes. There's no nudity, there's, but there's enough in there that he felt queasy, and he goes and talks to a psychoanalyst in New York, and who says, yes, these kinds of scenes, they not only thought of homosexuality as a disease, but as a communicable disease, something that could be passed on to, and I guess, impressionable young men like me. I didn't realize I was under, it's like, COVID. I mean, so they rated it X. Arthur Krim rates it X. He doesn't tell, that story isn't told in public at the time, but there it is. And so, and Hoffman was nervous. He was both loving being a great actor and a character actor, but at the same time, he loved his new celebrity and the fact that he was making suddenly a lot of money making movies. So again, he had two conflicting things going on with him.
I wanted to bring in now to the discussion the director of photography, Adam Hollander, another, in his contributions, all the incredible location work in New York City, just astonishing. And again, we were talking in the beginning, a collaborative film, and his contributions meshing with Schlesinger. Did they get along? How was their working relationship?
Well, Adam's still around, and he was just such a pleasure to talk to. He's such a smart, humane, just a wonderful guy, and I love talking to him. And he, and I called him. We spent a couple hours together, and then I called him several times. And he was after that, and he was always helpful. So I'm very fond of him. He was like 29 years old, and this is his first American feature film. He'd been trained in communist Poland, just like Polanski. He was. He knew his stuff. He'd had a documentary experience. Like all the other folks there, neorealism, was something he believed in. So he and Schlesinger both come out from a fairly, documentary background, and they agree that they're going to shoot New York. And they're both fascinated by New York because they're both newcomers to New York. And so, and also the technology had changed. It was easier to take smaller cameras and equipment and move around the city than it would have been, again, 5 or 10 years earlier. So they do scenes where they, where they rope off the area and they have extras and but they also do scenes that are stolen shots where they're in a van with a, a long lens, or they actually build a little like wooden crate with a window and set it up. And it's New York, so nobody bats an eye. And they're shooting Voight with a long lens when he's walking down Fifth Avenue and all that. I think when you watch the movie, one of the striking things now is the feel of New York in 1968. It feels very close to home, and they worked well together. I mean, Schlesinger, at one point Schlesinger wanted to fire Adam, of course, because that's kind of par for the course. The things were happening slowly. The New York crew was both very good on one level, very professional, but at the same time wanted to do things a certain way. And the gaffer and the lighting people wanted a lot of lights and this and that. And it just infuriated Schlesinger at times. And Adam was kind of the go-between in a way between his group and Schlesinger. So he got it from both ends. But he's such a sweetheart. And Schlesinger essentially trusted him. And he looks back on it all, Adam, today with great respect for Schlesinger and the work they did together. He's amused by all the things that happened, but at the same time, he knows, as he said, I was working with exceptionally talented people doing something we all thought was important. And as you know, what could be a better experience than that on a movie set?
You were talking about New York, which is the crux of Midnight Cowboy, those locations. But there was also a big scenes in Florida where they shot, and that has an entirely different look and feel, as does even the scenes, the black and white, and the different choices that were done in Texas, where some of it was also filmed, the sort of backstory flashback parts. So was he also integral to those choices?
Absolutely. I mean, he's there, That's the thing about Schlesinger. He's the leader of the band. He's got all these people and he's talking to them. I mean, he's not only got Adam, of course, and consulting every day, and they're watching the rushes together, and the amount of color in those scenes, especially that Dustin Hoffman fantasy by the poolside thing. I mean, they all love doing that. Waldo Salt's there every day, and he's rewriting that scene right up to the moment they film it. He's down in Florida with him, running around, and Schlesinger had him constantly on call. Anne Roth is designing costumes. She dressed all those women, you know, around the pool. I mean, she dressed every character in the whole damn movie. It's not like Edith Head, you know, in Hollywood doing the four leads and someone sews the rest of the stuff. Anne is there, consulted with. So he's got his little crew, Schlesinger, and Hollander is part of this trusted group. John drives them all crazy at various times because that's what he does. Jerry Hellman, incidentally, is also their producer to kind of keep things on an even keel. Michael Childers, who's John's lover, is around to keep John on an even keel. I mean, it's like it's a traveling troupe of people. But it's quite extraordinary how different the three locales are captured in that movie, and how flexible the decision making was, and the work was, and the work that Adam did. Again, it's his first movie really that he's able to do that. But Schlesinger had a lot of experience at this point and knew what he wanted, and Adam knew what his job was.
You mentioned in the book, which is really very disturbing, Jennifer Salt, the actress who was involved with living with John Voight, and also the daughter of Waldo Salt, gets cast in the film. And another thing that was interesting to me, looking at the past, did they not know? Did she not know? You read the script and it's this, you're going into this harrowing scene, and then it's filmed in a really brutal, upsetting way. But it's almost like that's how they were so into it that nobody thought about the consequences of playing these parts.
There's a very moving moment.
Said they thought it was important.
I want you to talk about that, Glenn, but I do want to add something that was really a nice thing to read, was that John Voight did pick up on that was very difficult for Jennifer.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, Adam. They were in a relationship by then, John and Jennifer, he understood that this was going to be difficult. She knew it, but she wanted, this is her first movie. And she was great to talk to, incidentally. I mean, she's so smart and can be so cutting and witty about everything that happened, not to her as well as to the others. She said, we did a long interview at one point, and she says at the end, she just looks at me and says, "Just don't make me out to be a total bitch." Because she's so honest about everybody, including herself. At one point she said to me, I said, "Well, how'd you like shooting, your first movie and going down to Texas?" And she said, "Well, if you don't mind being raped, it was fine." And we didn't, I didn't pick up on that at the time because we were talking about something else. But later on in a phone call, we talked about it, and she was quite frank about it. Yes, she had read the script. She knew what was going on, but it was a great opportunity for her. She loved being in it. This was her first movie. She's just out of Sarah Lawrence, trying to become an actor. She was trying to be the cool kid, she said, which is to say, to do whatever they wanted her to do. And,
she'll take off her clothes.
Yeah, she's the cool kid. Take off her clothes. Well, they gave her a rubber suit for the gang rape scene, but it's Texas in August, and I can tell you it's like 100 degrees, and so she had to take it off pretty quickly. And there's no choreographer, there's no intimacy coordinator. They weren't trying to be cruel to her, but they just went ahead and did what they did. And now, looking back on it, she knows exactly what happened. And one of my things in the book is it's a very, very male-oriented story, but the women characters I was able to write about are also had such fascinating experiences. We could go back to Marion Doherty, because I never did answer your question about that, Adam. But Marion, and then the actors, Brenda and Jennifer and Sylvia Miles, who has 6 minutes on the screen, but walks away with the first part of the movie to the point where she's nominated for Best Supporting Actress. You know, the women were really crucial to this thing, and they all had to put up with certain kinds of things. Marion Doherty doesn't even get a credit in the movie as the casting director. Jennifer has to go through this ordeal.
She wanted to have a soul card in the credits. Marion, she felt she had deserved it, and it was and when they ganged her up with 2 other names on her title card in the credits, she said, then either my own or take me off. And you know, they just, it's terrible. Like, this is one of the most incredibly cast films of its time, maybe, or maybe of American cinema, and she's not credited in the. It's a crime.
It is, and it says something about how women were treated in that era and in many other eras when it comes to movies. She was she was a combustible person. She expected it, thought she deserved it. Lynn Stallmaster was getting a single card for Thomas Crown Affair. I think that was
a guy, by the way.
Yeah, Lynn's a guy, exactly. And Jerry Hellman was a combustible, temperamental guy too. So when Marion sees the first preview, she marches up to Jerry and they have it out. And she says, you know, either give me my own card or take my name off it. And Jerry blows and says, well, your name's off it. And he told me, Jerry's still alive. He's not in great health, but wow. He was wonderful to talk to, and he regrets this very much because he agrees with what you said earlier, Adam, that she did a fabulous job of casting. I mean, John Schlesinger always said, when they asked him, well, how'd you get John Voight? He's so terrific. How'd you choose him? And John Schlesinger always said, I didn't choose him. Marion Doherty chose him and convinced me eventually to take him. So they understood what they had. Jerry says it's one of the things he most regrets in his long career. But there it was. And, you know, to write about that was really, again, you look for moments that tell you more than just the moment itself. You look for moments that tell you about the times that they occurred in, what was going on. You know, Marion Doherty was an unusual figure. She'd been casting theater and a lot of television, but you know, the studios had their own casting directors when the studio system was going. But by 1968, the studio system is shedding all those extra folks. And so Marion becomes an essential person, especially in New York. And all the supporting actors are superb. Voight and Hoffman are superb, and she's responsible for that.
Yeah, it's interesting because you make a compelling argument in the book. You mentioned the Academy still does not have a category for best casting in a film to this day, and you make a compelling argument that, and this is a prime example of a film that without the casting director just would not have turned out as well.
No, it's wonderful. I mean, the supporting actors all get like individual scenes with John Voight. It's like small little playlets, Bob Balbon said. I mean, he was fun to talk to also about this. And they're all just terrific. And that, you know, that's not easy to do. And in the old, I don't know, in the old studio system, they would have pulled people in to do it, but not the way Marion did, you know, not knowing these people and really having such a feel for New York and all these great actors.
Yeah. Well, the commitment from the scene with Bernard Hughes, again, there's some, I don't think I can see the movie again. I've seen it enough times, but it would be too troubling. His scene in particular, tell a little about the story, that his decision to do something in the scene.
Well, first, we always knew, Joe Buck has told us many times in the course of the movie that he can be violent, that he's a tough person. And mostly people make fun of him for that. And Ratso says, yeah, I get it. You're a real killer, you know. Yeah. But Joe does have that in him. He's got, you know, he and Ratso are both sort of these lonely, solitary, angry, and there's anger under the surface of both of them. Anyway, Joe is desperate toward the end of the movie to get money so he can take Ratso to Florida and perhaps save his life. Winter's closing in. Ratso is obviously deteriorating physically.
But when we get to Florida, you got to call me Rico.
Yeah, Florida's been his dream. It's not Joe Buck's dream. Joe Buck's dream is New York and beautiful, and middle-aged affluent women who he's going to service and be the ultimate stud for. It's a terrible business model in the end, but never mind. I mean, it doesn't work. Anyway, so he finally goes and finds this middle-aged businessman from Chicago, and they go up to the apartment, and when the guy holds out on him in terms of giving him money, Joe becomes violent, and it's a really brutal scene.
Well, Joe had his he had a nut he had to reach to get the bus ticket. So
he was desperate for the bus ticket.
So he knew what he had to leave with before he got in the room. Yeah.
But Bernard Hughes is extraordinarily powerful, and just another great performance. I mean, he's weak. But he wants this guy. He wants this tall, handsome guy from Texas. He wants to have sex with him. He's a bit of a sadomasochist. Anyway, Hughes tells Schlesinger at one point they're trying to figure out how to make this work and capture it. And Hughes mentions that he's got, not only that he has false teeth, but that he can push them out without using his fingers, that he can spit out the false teeth. And that's what happens right before Joe Buck sticks. Well, we don't need to go into the details of it. But the other thing, so this is Hughes, but the other thing that this scene shows, I mean, the brutality of it is something that a lot of people working on it were worried about, especially Michael Childers said, this is going to make Joe Buck so, it's going to take away all the sympathy that the audience has for Joe Buck. But John Schlesinger and Waldo Salt, the screenwriter, insisted that this had to stay in because they weren't making like a fairy tale happy movie, with a redemptive ending. This was John insisting on his vision of what the movie had to be. And I think it makes the movie more powerful and more, more enduring because of this. But boy, it's brutal. And we don't know if he's killed this guy. When Ratso asks him on the bus, did you, that Joe Buck says, just shut up, he doesn't want to talk about it. But that's what he did in order to help protect and defend and the only person he cares about, which is Ratso.
Well, you really get the feeling of the underbelly of New York City, which exists today, which always exists. We just don't notice it. We walk by those people, but yet they are, where they live and how they get their food. And it captures the subculture that exists in New York in just an incredible way, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And without an ounce of pity or condescension, he doesn't make a big deal out of the cops or, he's not making a social affairs movie at all.
Right.
But he's using that, and you learn a lot about all of that. And, people weren't making movies about people like this.
No.
In those days. These two characters are from some other world than the general world of Hollywood and American film. And so in that sense, it's also a breakthrough. It broke a lot of barriers, both in terms of popular culture and the treatment of homosexuality and other things. But in this way, it really takes you somewhere we haven't been very often.
I want to talk about John Voight a little bit.
I know. Thank you, Illeana. I was going to save it for last almost because.
Oh, okay.
We can talk about it now since you brought it up. I'm not pre-editing the show. I just watched it again. Unlike you, I can watch it. I watched it when the Criterion came out.
Watch the opening with the great song.
Yeah,
we're going to get to that too. But I watched it not long ago when they released it. The Criterion Collection released it. They have that.
Yeah, it's a beautiful Blu-ray rendition of it.
And I then watched it again, of course, while I was reading the book because I wanted all those moments to be fresh. And and I, every time I watch it, I mean, especially when I saw it after probably a number of years when the Criterion came out, I was tearing up at Jon Voight's performance, which I don't remember doing when I was younger, and I'd seen it 2 or 3 times before. But now, and then this last time the other day when I watched it again, I just have a deeper and deeper appreciation for that performance. Jon Voight is just stunning.
Well, again, he's a well-trained New York actor. He's an interesting guy because he's got incredible self-confidence, you know, and he's 100% in for everything. And yet he has no experience in a movie, but he wants this part desperately. He's read the novel. He thinks he can do Joe Buck, and he's afraid nobody else can, you know. He was fascinating to talk to because, you know, he's in his early 80s. He's been in so many movies. He's got this kind of right-wing political thing going. I didn't know what it was going to be about, and it started out a little rough, the interview, but then he looked at me at one point and says, well, you're here to talk about Midnight Cowboy. And from then on, it was everything changed. I mean, he's so generous about the movie. He knows what a break it was. He's well-trained coming into it. He understands the character, that there's comedy in it, that the sort of country mouse coming to, you know, the big city and all that there is a comic element. He understands that Joe Buck is a respectful person. He's nice to his elders. He loves his grandmother. But at the same time, he gets the fact that there's something destroyed within this guy, something that's been deeply damaged by growing up in such isolation in Texas. This guy is sort of God's lonely man. Voight understands all of that, and he really wants to do it. He has a terrible time getting the part because he doesn't look like the Midnight Cowboy, like Joe Buck from the novel. And John Schlesinger has his own notions of male, you know, of what men look like. And he wants somebody dark-haired and tall, and he wants Michael Sarrazin, ultimately, a very handsome, you know, French-Canadian actor. And they offer it to Michael Sarrazin, and they even start, you know, measuring him for the costumes. But then Universal, which has Sarrazin under contract, asks for more money. And Jerry Hellman, you know, they're on a very tight budget from United Artists. So they start, you know, looking at the audition tapes again. And they said every time they looked at Michael Sarrazin, he looked a little worse. And every time they looked at Jon Voight, he looked a little better. They talked themselves into it. But Marion Doherty had pushed this really hard to get Voight in the movie. She felt he had the range to do that bit of violence, that the violence and the vulnerability, she thought Voight could pull that off. And in the end, you know, and she pushed him hard. At one point, she storms out of when they're looking at these auditions, and Jerry says, "What's the matter, Marion?" And he says, "What's the matter? You're about to make a huge mistake. That's what's the matter, you know, by hiring Sarrazin rather than Voight." So he gets it, and he just buries himself in it. He's from Yonkers. He's like the closest thing to a real New Yorker in this film company group, except for Jerry himself. His accent is a Yonkers accent. I've watched his audition tape. The accent, he tries to move it south. I said he got as far as like somewhere between Yonkers and Texas, like maybe in Philadelphia somewhere. It's no good at all. So he takes his little tape recorder, goes down to Texas and spends a week or two and comes back. And Schlesinger suggests raising the voice an octave, which I guess actors can do, Illeana. I was stunned to see and hear his real voice versus this. And suddenly he's Joe Buck. And Ann Roth outfits him beautifully in a costume that is sort of, as she said, something you would have gotten at Montgomery Ward's, you know. Yeah. It's very distinctive. She sews the jacket herself, you know, to make it distinctive. And there he is on the streets of New York, and he is this naive Texas guy, and he's building the character from inside. He and Hoffman are challenging each other and working together. Two guys, not friends. I mean, they hadn't worked together in New York. They knew about each other, but they weren't close by any means. But they really understood how much they needed each other. And Hoffman, you know, Hoffman is committed to getting this and getting it right. So they're challenging each other occasionally, as someone will say to the other, "Come on, buddy, you got to raise your game a little bit here, otherwise it's all going to be on, you know, they're going to just, have me in the scene. And so there's a little bit of that going on, and he just gets it, doesn't he? I mean, it's the more naturalistic performance, I would say. Maybe because we don't know Jon Voight when we first see the movie. We don't know who he is. He just seems to be Joe Buck all the way through.
Yeah.
With Hoffman, it's a little more of a performance because we know Hoffman already, and but with Voight, it's just all like this guy.
Well, yeah, it's very stripped down. Maybe that's not accurate, but there's so many moments where he just doesn't say anything, but he's just observing others, and it's that look in his eye of it's so vulnerable. There's a vulnerability. It's very moving. It's very moving.
Yeah, in the little scene in the cafeteria where the woman sits down with her son across from him, and he's watching as she's obviously high on something, and she's running this toy mouse up and down him, and just the expression on his face, like, boy, what the hell is this?
Yeah, he's like a little boy. He's on a certain level, he's a little boy, and you see that in his eyes. It's in
the eyes. It's all in the eyes.
I think he and Hoffman have a classic kind of actors dynamic. Did Voight ever talk about objectives that they had in playing the scenes? Because so many of the scenes are, that's what it seems like to me. Just two bulls, going at each other.
Yeah, no, he didn't directly address that. But they had talked everything through. I mean, even after the script was done and, and the rehearsals were over and they're making it, they're sitting having lunch every day and they're talking about masturbation or reincarnation, or, they're just talking about things as if Ratso and Joe are sitting there, right, over lunch, just going on. They never let up. And so whatever it is they're about to do, they're working this intimacy and this competition. I mean, in many ways, it reflects the two characters. I mean, there's their own sense of competition. You see those wonderful moments, in the X flat in this shabby, squat where, when Ratso says things like, you're beginning to smell, and that's not a good thing for a hustler in New York, I mean, you can see Dustin Hoffman having improv that for a while, and then it's built into the script again. And Joe coming back and them arguing about who's gay and who isn't, all that. I mean, this is stuff they've worked on endlessly. It sometimes drove Schlesinger crazy. I think, Adam, you mentioned the fact that Voight suggested, or that Hoffman suggested they be filmed in bed together at some point.
I think Illeana said that, actually. But...
Yeah, Hoffman also, Illeana, yeah. Hoffman also suggested at one point that Ratso should be seen having an African-American guy sit next to him at the counter, and then Ratso walking out because he's a racist. And Schlesinger said to both these things, thank you very much, Dustin. Those are terrific ideas. We're already making a movie nobody's ever want to see, and you're suggesting we add these little touches to it. So their level of commitment and their level of collaboration is just off the charts.
Did either one talk about the effects? Were there any post effects? Like, how do you get rid of this character of Joe?
That's interesting. They didn't talk so much about that as what do you do next?
Right.
Voight is suddenly he's a movie star.
Yeah.
And Voight wants to do great work. I mean, yeah, sure, he wants the money and all that, but that he's just such a committed person. Both these guys are just obsessed with doing important work. So Voight has trouble. I mean, he makes The Revolutionary a movie, and he's very, very good in it. And it's a pretty good movie, actually, but goes nowhere. He turns down Love Story. He turns down Jaws. He turns down the part that Richard Dreyfuss did.
Yeah.
In Jaws, he can't find his footing. And it's partly his own fault because he has to do what he has to do. It's more, he doesn't know what to do with fame. He makes some other great movies. I mean, he's wonderful in Deliverance, and that comes fairly early, but there's no blueprint for these guys. That's the downside of losing the studio system. They would have been in 2 or 3 movies a year. Hoffman manages to navigate this a little better. He may have had better management. You know, he himself, I don't know why Hoffman is more successful than Voight in the 70s, because they both have trouble getting their footing, but Hoffman's movies are generally more memorable. That was the big problem for them. I don't know. Voight was such a Boy Scout. He would pick up homeless people on the street, you know, that sort of thing. But
I think propelled by The Graduate, just he had an advantage to the roles, Hoffman. I mean, that maybe you know, Hoffman was he's just really, really, what's the word, shrewd. I mean, on a level that we take for granted.
Well,
you know,
Voight also goes into making Catch-22 with Mike Nichols, and that is a very problematic long shoot. And my understanding was always that he was very unhappy with his idea of how to play the part, and Nichols did not mesh at all. And sometimes something like that can get you off track.
yeah, I'm sure it didn't help, though he's very good in Catch-22.
I love him in it.
Yeah, I think he's one of the
Apparently
best.
he was not happy with
His
it.
standards were just so high, and his insistence, and you know, and John Schlesinger had allowed him a lot of room. He'd rope him back in, and you know, there were moments when Schlesinger confesses later that he was fed up with both these guys at times. But nonetheless, I mean, he and Voight had a very close partnership in that movie, and Schlesinger admired what Voight did, and Voight felt that Schlesinger helped him a lot. So he was used to that, and Mike Nichols, especially trying to rope in Catch-22, and Mike had so many problems in that movie. I mean, you know, I love Mark Harris's book just like you do, you know. So Mike Nichols just wasn't going to give Voight what the kind of partnership that Voight wanted, and sure, that didn't help matters.
Well, and also then we should mention, I'd like to mention that Voight went on to do Coming Home with Hal Ashby, and that was a tremendous success. So
he's wonderful in that, and it showed
it's a brave.
And it showed that he could be a leading man, very sexy leading man, even sitting in a wheelchair for a whole movie. I mean, yeah, no, Voight is an actor's actor. I mean, you know, I think he's always good, even in a lot of not so great movies. But it was hard for him.
He is. You can't deny that he's.
Did either actor talk about any sort of particular great direction they received from Schlesinger? I know Hoffman then worked with him again in Marathon Man, but did they mention anything specific about his technique of directing?
Well, I mean, Voight mentioned Schlesinger's suggestion that he raise his voice an octave, and that really unlocked some things for him, right. And helped him in forming it. But I'm trying to think whether there was any specific thing, just the encouragement, you know, to take what they were doing. So, you know, the great moment Schlesinger recalls, of course, is when they're going to this psychedelic party in this last part of the movie, in the last half of the movie, and Ratso, they've been coming through the snow. Incidentally, it's filmed in June in New York, and you know, coming through, and they're in the foyer to go up the steps, and Ratso is in bad shape. He's sweating, and Voight combs his hair for him. Joe Buck combs Ratso's hair. And Ratso reaches out and touches Voight's midriff with the shirts come up. Hold on. That's the actors. That wasn't Schlesinger. Schlesinger looked at that and was just astonished, and told them so. And
so the characters had a life of their own at that point, and they bonded. I mean, on this emotional, visceral, very beautiful level. It was that moment was crystallized right there.
Schlesinger he knew at that point, I mean, already he had a lot of confidence in these guys, and his ability to express that confidence and to joke around with them, and, you know, all of that. I think he let them be who they were. Waldo in some ways was almost more important to their forming the characters, because they would call Waldo in, and he would come in and explain scenes to them. The great scene when Joe Buck comes back from his night with Shirley, and he's got money at last, and he's going to be, now he's going to have that male hustler career he always wanted, but there's Ratso dying in front of him. And they couldn't figure out how to play that, the two guys with the lines. It just seemed too a little sweet and sickly that Joe leaves from there to go out. Well, Waldo comes in bleary-eyed, they call him in, and he explains that no, Joe isn't actually feeling, affection towards Ratso and commitment to him. He wants to get rid of Ratso at this point. He wants, he's saying goodbye to Ratso, and that unlocked it for Voight especially, how to play that scene. And it works beautifully. It's no longer, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid smirking and happy with each other. It's something very much more real. And yet Joe is still committed to Ratso. So those kinds of things were very helpful. But Schlesinger just loved what they were doing in these kind of moments. And he called Waldo in to help them at times. But that's what I got out of that.
You brought up the Andy Warhol. I mean, that's a whole other conversation. I mean, right, Illeana? I mean, but it's
a great side part of the film. Andy Warhol's jealousy that they made.
Let's leave that maybe to dangle in front of potential readers. By the way, let's emphasize the name of the book is called "Shooting Midnight Cowboy: Art, Sex, Loneliness, Liberation, and the Making of a Dark Classic" by the great Glenn Frankel, who I'm so glad that we're doing this. Before we stop, we should have to mention "Everybody's Talking" because it's such an incredible song. I downloaded that album, Aerial Ballet, I think it's called.
Yeah,
which was this early Harry Nilsson album where, his producer, or I think, insisted that he include this sort of obscurish Fred Neil folk singer song on the album, and Nelson's kind of pushed back a little, saying, I just want to do my own songs. That's what I do. And he goes, no, he needs Sissy. It ended up on the album, and then that ended up like, I guess who heard it and how did it end up on the in the to be like coming out of The Graduate, almost where Dustin Hoffman was, where music plays such an incredible role. That song, it becomes iconic.
Yeah, it's
everybody else wanted to. I'm sorry, everybody also. They were Joni Mitchell, Leonard Cohen. I mean, he had the top of the top wanting to submit a song for that movie.
He did. It's Michael Childers who's kind of, John puts him in charge of bringing in albums. These old albums we used to have, and it's Michael who brings them Aerial Ballet. And they hear Everybody's Talking, and it talks to John. He likes the rhythm of it. He starts thinking about cutting the movie to this. He doesn't think he's going to actually use it in the movie itself. It's a temp track kind of thing. But all these other great performers come along. Bob Dylan offers him Lay Lady Lay. Joni Mitchell writes a Midnight Cowboy song. But none of them, but John is falling in love with the song, not only the rhythm of Everybody's Talking, but the enigmatic, poignant nature of the lyrics. Everybody's talking at me, can't hear a word they're saying, only the shadows of my mind. This captures Joe's loneliness and solitude and trying to create a world, a home for himself, a place he can go to where the sun's shining. All of that just works for John, because it isn't narrating the story, it's enhancing it, and it's putting you inside this enigmatic figure. And so he sticks to it. And United Artists isn't happy about this either, because they don't own the rights to Everybody's Talking. It was on this earlier album. Harry Nilsson, as you said, didn't write the song, and he's ambivalent, and he goes out and writes another song with the same rhythm. I Guess the Lord Must Be in New York City, which is a perfectly good song.
Great song.
But too literal, and the same rhythm and everything, and but too literal for John. He loves the enigmatic quality of Everybody's Talking, and he sticks with it. And it's a very smart move, because in the end, it's one of the things that really ties that movie, that gives you its own story, you know, to go along with the story that you're seeing on the screen. And that's what you remember. You know, there's several memorable things about that movie. The way they're dressed and the music are such an important part. And you're right, it comes after The Graduate, and that's important because John has seen for the first time what music can do for a movie, and he loves it. And then he hires John Barry to be the musical director for the movie, and John brings in all kinds of other things in that also enhance it. Barry says John Schlesinger was the best director he ever worked with in terms of understanding what what music can do for a movie, and this movie has it.
And the great Toots Thielemans too.
That's John Barry wrote that theme. It's the Midnight Cowboy theme, and it's a harmonica, in that wonderful at the end of the first third of the movie where Joe Buck is basically busted. He's been kicked out of his cheap hotel. He's got the various predators like Sylvia Miles, the Sylvia Miles character, and others have stripped him of his wallet, of whatever money he's got, and he's walking the streets, and there's no dialogue. It's simply images of Joe Buck moving around on 42nd Street, looking at a few other faux cowboys who are hanging out underneath movie marquees, and saying, eventually looks at himself in the mirror and says, "You know what you got to do, cowboy," and which leads to the Bob Balaban scene. But the thing is playing, and it's sort of, I didn't do anything with the idea that this was a cowboy movie. You know, in the end, I thought that was a little too. But this moment where we're hearing this wailing harmonica, you could be like in a canyon somewhere out in Wyoming. It has that feel, and it just captures how absolutely isolated this poor guy is. It's so beautifully done. And you notice they redo both songs right at the end of the film. They do the harmonica theme, and they do Everybody's Talking. Everybody's Talking is for the bus, with the energy of the bus, but then the harmonica theme sort of closes it out.
And I remember, of course, and I also had the soundtrack along with the paperback. It's a terrific soundtrack.
Yeah, it isn't. It's been reissued in a 2 CD thing, which is quite interesting to see. It drives my wife crazy when I play it all the time, but it's really quite wonderful.
Oh, man. Well, this has been well, and I just want to insert that we left out Brenda Vaccaro, and there's lots I mean, there's so much to talk about. I feel like, but I
and the famous we're skipping over the most famous, the iconic shot, stolen shot in the movie where Dustin Hoffman says, "I'm walking here."
Oh, right, very good. That's
which
right.
may or may not have been.
It's covered.
That was also part of Oscar lore. I mean, there was never an Oscar recap, was there, without that scene?
No, right. Exactly.
That's it. That's the most memorable moment.
And
that's the two iconic shots of in any Chuck Workman Oscar recap were always Midnight Cowboy, always John Voight walking down the street, and then "I'm walking here." It's the best. It is, in 100 years of cinema, it is one of the great moments.
Look, with these gals that want to buy it, most of them are old and dignified. Social register types, you know what I mean? They can't be trotting down to Times Square to pick out the merchandise. They gotta have some kind of middleman. And that's where old Daniel comes in, you know what I mean?
Hey, I'm walking here! I'm walking here! Up yours, you son of a bitch! You don't talk to me that way! Get out of here!
It is, and it's so classic New York. That's the New York I knew and was frightened by back when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And it looks real. I'm gonna get, who knows if it was, if it really happened and then it was staged. On movies you never really know, but it looks like a car really is about to hit them.
Well, it's in the book, the full anecdote. I mean, it's pages of this book, this fantastic book. Glenn, thank you so much. My only thing I'm disappointed or sad about is that we have to wait a few more years till that we can do this again.
Well, I mean, I was thrilled when I found out I was going to do this with you guys. Again, I love Mark Harris. I mean, you're doing so many interesting people, and so for me, this is like recognition in a way that I really wasn't expecting. I love the book's gotten a good reception, and I'm very pleased about that. And I just was so fortunate. You know, I knew this would be an interesting movie, but I had no idea just how rich it would be and how many aspects of life in the 60s it would cover. So thanks for having me, both of you. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, so encompassing, not only for movie lovers, but the gay culture, the filmmakers. That's what's so extraordinary to me, is that the film is so universal, because it's about a dream that's always out of reach, you know? And I think that the subject matter is secondary. And that's why if we were kids, I think that what I saw in the movie was the love between the two men, and you know, him being a male hustler was secondary. It was, you know, what stayed with me was their love for each other, and their, you know, that they have a dream. And I think that is why the movie is universal and holds up.
These the little things that I discover, I kind of, Illeana, like when you're talking about that, it's like by the time they make that stop on the ride down to Florida and they get rid of their clothes, it's a big moment, which is almost disposable or treated disposably, in the sense that, well, he's disposing of their clothes, but both of their clothes, they're shedding that fake, well, and maybe it's not fake, but it's like a new skin they were developing. And unfortunately, Ratso doesn't make it, but he made it into Florida alive, and he got rid of those clothes. And I don't know, it's a powerful moment. And then Joe's like, Joe is like, you know, maybe that was never going to work. Like you said, it's not the right business model. I think just get a job, and because, you know, he achieved something which was love, friendship. He never had it before, so he didn't need to do that other stuff. That wasn't going to get him that, you know.
Yeah, it's a great moment, and Schlesinger treats it, as you say. I mean, he tells it, he doesn't romanticize it. We don't really know what's going to happen to Joe Buck when the movie's over, but we buy that this is real. And I think that was Schlesinger's great art. And I totally agree with you both. This is the reason this movie's worth watching 52 years later. The core of the movie, the emotional core of these two vulnerable, life's, you know, lonely men finding something, some, you know, way of living in the world is a theme that will speak for generations, I'm quite sure.
Well, thank you so much for writing the book. I learned so much, and it was so entertaining, you know.
It was fun. I mean, because these, you know, these characters are so interesting, they just pulled it along. Once I got into the movie part, I mean, I find writing very difficult and painful at times, but this time it was easier in a way, because these folks are they just leap off the page. So
anyway, take it easy. I'll be in touch soon with the publicist.
Okay, thanks. Thank you both so much. I mean, this was just a pleasure.
Thank you.
All right, Illeana, take care.
Okay.
Both of you guys.
Honey.
Bye.